Hello, 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 Grid. This is Danielle Palloschi-Browne. I'm an investor and an agent, and I am here with my very now dear friend, new colleague, and off-market real estate expert, Chase Clement with New Western. So you might have seen us both in our last video from 2 weeks ago, and we mentioned wanting to do another one of these discussions, live discussions for you guys about how to figure out the best ROI for a property. So that's what we're going to go over today, and I'm really, really excited for it. Okay, so Chase, where do you think we should start? Or where do you start? Because I know I could go right into it, but I'd love to know your perspective.
Same. So I was looking forward to this discussion. When you and I identified the topic, I got very excited because I think it's a very relevant time to make sure that you understand multiple investment strategies and being able to let the deal help you decide which exit strategy on an investment deal is the most appropriate one for you at that time. And with what the market's doing, with what interest rates are doing and some changes that are happening, it's a good time to be able to understand more than one exit strategy.
Well, and the truth is many lenders, hard money lenders, private lenders, and commercial banks, they want to know what your plan is. So, and they also want to know what your plan B is. Like lenders are getting much more, well, I guess they're scrutinizing loan applications, especially commercial loan applications to do development work. So they want to know what your plan is. And quite honestly, you probably shouldn't be buying a property unless you have an A, B, and C plan. Like you're otherwise setting yourself up to fail. Like I know for when I start comping properties, whether it's for me or whether it's for a client, because again, I'm a real estate agent by trade. I always start with comps, right? You got to start somewhere. Like, what are we looking at? What do we have and what are we comparing it to? And there's a few things about those comps and the subject property that I like to look at. Now, in DC, because I think we were just talking about this the other day, it's so important to know the zoning. So like what you can do with different types of zoning and what certain zoning types, what the likelihood of you being able to get a variance if needed, or like a zoning change to like say do a condo conversion or something like that. It's really important to kind of read up on that. And you can look at a county or a city website and get that information. If you look up a zoning code, you can find that right online. It'll tell you exactly what's included and exactly what the exceptions and special uses are. So I know I do that a lot. What are the other things that you like to look at right away when you're comping or we're studying a subject property?
Yes, exactly. The subject property is what I'm glad you mentioned, because no matter what exit strategy you're going to employ or you're looking at potentially, you always need to start with a full understanding of your subject property, because that will show you, it will make available to you and take away certain strategies with that property. If you have strict zoning with nothing around you that shows zoning variances being given, you're probably going to say, okay, this is unlikely to change. And just the full understanding of your subject property is so important. And there are so many resources available online to investors who don't have their real estate license. You know, obviously, if you have your license, you can get on the MLS and search tax record, property history, last listings. You can understand there are more resources available to you, but Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, Hubsnoo, there are so many online databases with most of the properties out there in them. So understanding your subject property is always where I start, always.
Yep.
And that's the main, what is your criteria for understanding a subject property? Danielle, I'm curious to hear what things you're looking at.
So it depends on if I'm just being honest, it depends on the neighborhood a bit. Like, where are we? What state are we in? What county are we in? But it almost always first starts with, what are you telling me it is? And then next is, well, what is it according to tax records? Like, what is it actually zoned for? Are you telling me it's a house, but really it's a storefront? Like, so there's a little bit of discovery in the, what are we actually looking at? Like, especially with like bedrooms and basements, right? It might be a 5-bedroom. In reality, it's a 3, or according to the tax record, it's a 3. And you want to compare apples to apples as best as possible. Agreed. A lot of times you're not going to match up bedrooms. Like, especially in DC, sometimes I think it's almost a futile effort. And if I'm finding there's a big discrepancy, especially in the 3 to 4 bedroom range or 2 to 3 bedroom range, I will specifically then compare square footage and how many levels a property has, because then I know what's the usability of it. So this kind of dives then into what can be here? Like, what is it now, but what could be here? So for instance, there's a lot of like DC row homes, right? Some have basements. Some of those basements you can actually stand up in or meet building code criteria. Like, you're really looking for like an 8-foot ceiling. Minimum is like 7.5 feet, but you really want 8 feet because you need to put like some sheetrock and a light and like just not have. I'm 6 feet tall, so like I don't want it, and you're taller than me. Like, I don't want it right in my head. But legal height, you want to make sure it's legal height. Otherwise, you have to deal with things like underpinning and very large expenses, which we're going to touch into that a bit in a second. But you want to look at the I would say the biggest parts of the structure, the bones. Like, what do you have? How many square feet on each floor? What's the plumbing situation right now? What are the air rights? So can you build up? Can you bump back? Does it have parking? Like, things you can't really change, right, about the property. So I look at those things first, and then I figure out what it could be, because you need to know what you're starting with. Like, what blank slate can you have? Like, how do you approach it?
I think you've identified a theme that is relevant to most of the things we're talking about in our discussion, which is start with a zoomed out view and or casting a wider net. And as you see certain indicators, begin to zoom in a bit more and zoom in on individual aspects of your subject property or of the comps, because the signs are there. It really is. I love that you called it discovery, because you really are just approaching available data and doing with it what you can, what you know to do. And if you see, if you see on Zillow that it says 3 beds and on Redfin it says 4 beds, it could be a number of things. It could be that an agent wanted to juice their listing and bring more, or a for sale by owner wanted to make their product seem like more than it is, or they might have a bedroom in the basement that they call a 4th bedroom, might not legally be a 4th bedroom on a listing. So the things are there for you to understand. This is very straightforward. This is what it is, or there's some discrepancy and it is to be investigated further. So subject properties first, finding out what what it's said to be out there and what it actually is of the utmost importance. So I'm looking at, last listing, public record, public viewing listings like Zillow, like Redfin. I want to see pictures. I want to see a street view. My zoomed out view is understanding as much about the property as possible. So just poking around and basically trying to walk through the property from my computer. And that starts with street view outside, seeing what's around it, and then identifying individual parts of the property that need more a closer look.
Yep. And like, once you have that firm understanding of this is what I'm looking at, and this is the type that I need to be comparing it to, then you start with, I divide then my research into 2 different angles. First is as is comps. So I want to find other things that sold like the thing I'm looking at right now, or as close as I possibly can, really within that neighborhood as much as possible. And this might shock a lot of people. I don't look at zip code. I think zip code is a little dicey. Zip codes can be either too big or too small. I think I look at a map. I look at an actual map, and I usually will use major roads as boundaries. And the reason I do that is because that is how I personally feel that neighborhoods are created. People aren't really walking across Route 50 in DC because that's terrifying and that's playing a really bad game of Frogger. So things that are north or south of Route 50, I'm going to try to keep things that are south of Route 50 or north of. I want to compare apples to apples, right? So I try to compare apples to apples by using the map, using major roads, and thinking if this is a walkable neighborhood in particular, where would people be comfortable walking? Most likely under a mile. And I usually make my own boundary. So a lot of people do it differently though. It's all about personal style. I think a little bit, like a lot of it's going to overlap. And then there's about 20 to 25% that's really like your spin on it, right? Because some people just do like a radius, right? Like a circle radius. there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, because the things that are closest in your radius are still going to probably fall within the same like walkability polygon or whatever that I'm drawing.
Sure.
So it's really the wider the net that gets a little fuzzy, but that's going to get a little fuzzy no matter what.
Agreed. I think
Yeah.
A part of me wishes that everyone had access to the MLS, because it is such a robust resource if you know how to manipulate it correctly. And at the same time, it can be very overwhelming and very easy to misinterpret. So if it's all right with you, I just want to share my screen and show people a resource that is available to every real estate agent. Lean on your agent for things like close comps. Thank you, Danielle. So the reason why I'm pulling this up is to show you a resource that is available to every single real estate agent, and hopefully one that they know how to utilize when looking for comps. Danielle, you began talking about comps, and I started to think about how probably most of the comps I've ever been sent, whether it be by a seller, a potential buyer, a wholesaler, an agent, for one reason or another, aren't real comps, because it's so easy to see a product, see another product that's sold and say, this is that. But really, when you get into the details of your comping criteria is where you can determine what is appropriate and what isn't an appropriate comp. So I just wanted to pull this up to quickly show you guys. Danielle spoke about map view being important. And this is Bright MLS. This is the multiple listing service for agents. I'm going to look at a 1/4 mile radius around this property, 1516 North Carolina Ave Northeast. There are 152 matches. That's a lot of data for me to sift through. So before I actually look at those results, I will go to my map, and I want to show you guys some cool features.
Oh, and you like the satellite view.
So I do actually, thanks to a colleague of mine, Scott DeCamp. He pointed out that there are things you can see on a satellite that you can't see on a normal map view. The quality of what's going on around you, specific zonings of things. Maybe something's a parking lot that looks like a building. It might be a bit of an eyesore, but it can be more telling when you're looking for specific answers. So the feature I wanted to discuss is the layer feature. And you were talking about map views in neighborhoods. The MLS provides you the ability to sort, to layer onto your map neighborhood dividing lines. So this way, when I'm comping, I can actually see what is in and what is out of our neighborhood. We seem to be right on the border of Kingman Park. So now that I realize that, now that I see that on the map, I can go in and look at values on both sides of the dividing line and identify whether that's actually a relevant boundary for us to take into account. If values on both sides of 15th Street are the same, it won't be as important to me to exclude everything on the other side of 15th. And same thing with, let me take away my neighborhood layer and show the zip code layer. Same thing, just instead of zip codes, or instead of neighborhoods, we now have zip code dividing lines. We can take the data that's provided.
And they don't overlap 100%.
Yeah.
So it's good to look at all of them differently and independently, or see where they overlap.
Absolutely. And then we can determine from the data that's provided, is that a relevant dividing line or not? Doesn't necessarily always have to be, that's a different zip code, that's not relevant. Well, let's look at the data that's provided to us and determine if it is or not. I'm a big proponent of seeing what the data tells you and not using the data to go see something. Just wanted to show that feature.
And don't make it tell you a story you want to hear. It's very easy to do that. Like, you can widen a search, like you just said, 100 and whatever, or 200 and something properties came up when you were doing like a very vague search, right? Yeah. You can make the data tell you a story if you really want to. That is a recipe for disaster, though. If you have to force it to give you the info you were hoping for on a deal, you are likely putting yourself at a much greater risk. It's just not smart. But if it's very clearly there and you have several examples and everything looks good, then run with it. Trust the data, but don't push the data. You can't fudge it. Like, you really can't make it. Don't push it too hard.
Agreed.
That's important. Not at all.
That's important.
So, okay, so we did a good job at like talking about like, okay, as is comps, right? Now the other side of things, you have to do some ARV comps or like out sale comps. I say that a lot. I don't know if anybody else does. I say like in sale and out sale. Everyone else says like acquisition and ARV. To me, and like for my language, just so everybody else knows, that's the same thing for me. So when you're looking at what you can do with it, because now you're like, all right, I have a box this big. It's got a basement. It's got 2 other levels. Each level is about 600, 700 square feet. We could put a 3rd level. We could do a roof deck. We can have parking in the back. Now, what have other people done? If there are similar homes in the neighborhood and you found other as-is comps that had sold, what did those turn into? Were they flipped? Were other investors, did they sell those later on? Or are they in the process of selling? Drive that neighborhood and see, like, are you seeing construction going on? Because you could look up those permits and figure out what they're doing because it's public record. So you could go on the DCRA website or Fairfax County, Arlington County, insert a county, right? And you could see what other people are doing, or really just go up to a construction site. I've never had anybody be like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah, same.
Never once. They're always like, oh, that's really nice of you. And I'll be like, I'm thinking about buying or listing something across the street. What are you guys doing? Because they want to know too, because you're going to be their competition too. And it's so much better to collaborate. Yeah. So those are easy ways to figure out ARV, but you're going to have a lot of actually sold comps. Do not count active, coming soon. Or, I mean, you can do a little bit of pending, but I call every single one of those agents and I'll see if they'll tell me what they're pending for. Because unless they've closed, it's a very nice suggestion of what people are doing on the market, but it's not an actual comp. Really, closed and pending comps, I think, and pending, like, that's a little bit of a stretch for me, but closed comps are the ones that really count. How do you look at it? Or how do you like to compare at least the out sale or acquisition comps?
So I look at it similarly. Excuse me for a sec. There's interference. The office is active. So as far as ARV comps go, and I think it's important to do what you suggested and not just look at ARV comps, not just understand your subject property and then look at ARV comps. It's important to understand whether or not something is a deal, not just because of its potential, but where it's priced at right now. That's why I think trying to poke holes in every stage of the process, the as-is stage, your current buy, is this an appropriate as-is value? Does it look like I'm getting a deal based on its ARV, or why am I $50K more expensive than all of the other as-is comps in the area? I think it's so important to analyze each part of the process and try and poke holes and not just hear what you want to hear. To answer your question with out sale comps, criteria is everything to me. That's why I sometimes look at neighborhood and zip code to see how to view the data. And once I've found out, okay, I need to be looking in this area, I am looking for, like you said, closed comps are the most relevant, straightforward, relevant data that there is. And pending has a little bit of an asterisk because something might be under contract to sell and then it might not sell. And then it might take a 20K price drop and sit on the market for another 3 months. It's like, well, good thing I didn't use that comp and put the cart before the horse. So I also look at closed comps. My criteria right now is different than it's ever been. And that's because of the recent market shifts and financial changes. The cost of borrowing money has changed a lot recently. So whereas I was using,
it keeps changing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a living, breathing thing.
Every day it's a little different.
It's important for us to tell people to make sure that their ear is to the ground on things like that because it should affect how they're comping a deal. Yes. I used to use comps that were 365 days and it was relevant. Whereas right now, 6 months is even stretching it on an ARV comp because we can all see that the market 6 months ago wasn't doing exactly what it's doing today. So
for sure.
the
Absolutely.
more recently your comp closed, the better that comp is, the more relevant it is. Ideally, you want things that have closed within the last month or two. 3 months is still relevant. 6 months happened, but take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
You know?
So it's a little dicey, like past
Yeah.
March.
Right. Agreed.
March of this year.
Yeah. And, the more similarities there are between your subject property and said comp, the more relevant that comp is. Little differences like I'm an interior row, that's a semi-attached twin. It's not the exact same thing, and it can still be relevant. So I'm looking for similarities and differences. The more similar something is to my subject, the more weight I'm putting into that comp. And power in numbers as well. That's relevant to me. If I have 10 comp results and 2 of them are active and 1 of them's pending and the other 7 are closed and very similar, I'm feeling confident about that exit just because there's not a lot available. Most of the things that went up for sale did sell, and here are all examples of what they were. If I get 10 results and 6 of them are active and the other 4 are from 6 months ago, make
Feel a
sure,
little less confident.
Yeah, less confident, a less of an area I'm willing to take risks in. Need to be a really good deal for results like that.
Yeah.
So I know I
completely
all over the map, but there are a lot of factors to take into account when looking at ARV comps.
There's a ton of factors, and really, so that kind of gets to the nuts and bolts of like this entire exercise, right? Because you start with what are we looking at, what else has sold that's like it, as is comps, what were they turned into, so ARV comps or out sale comps, and now you're like, okay, now that I have all this information, what is the best way for me to make money on this, if any way? The answer might be none. Like, unless you get the price down, the answer might be don't do it. But if you exclude that as an option, you could then go, okay, again, we're looking at, like, say, a DC row home or a twin, like you said, a semi-attached house. What kind of circumstances, what can I turn this into? Should I do a longer renovation, a more expensive renovation, but convert it into 2 condos? Can I do that based on the zoning and the things I know about the subject property? If you can, or if you've seen an example in your after renovation comps that you've seen down the street, like, oh, that one was turned into two condos and they made 800 or 900,000 each condo, I'm willing to take 2 years to do that, 2 to 3 years to get the permits, approvals, underpinning, all of the above to do it. But maybe you're like, I am not as skilled with that. I don't know how to, like, that is a process that's not really for a new investor. I'd say, unless you want to put your money and make money on somebody else's deal, don't start with condo conversions, because they will make or break you as a person. But if you say you just want to do a low level cosmetic flip and you're like, okay, what do I need to buy this for? What's it going to cost to fix it? Add 15% to that. And then do the numbers make sense? And you shouldn't be making 10 grand at the end of that. Like, you need to look at the price point. And if you're not making, if your profit margin is not at least 20%, that's a little dicey. It's a little dicey, because if you need a contingency exam, and a contingency really of like up to 10% for a surprise, so that at the end you can still make at least 10%. For anyone who thinks that they're coming into flips and things like that with how the market has been, I don't know anyone who consistently makes 40, 30%, the 2008 numbers. No one does that. So understanding what your efforts and how much you are actually going to, and that's also before you pay any taxes on your money. We could probably go into that as like a future conversation if you want to.
Sure.
Because I know it kind of diverts a little bit from what we were talking about now. But if you don't understand what you're actually going to make for the time and effort and energy you're going to put into it, you also should probably invest your money into somebody else's project and get mentorship before trying this. But let's just assume you've done this at least once or twice, or you're trying to get into it and you want to dedicate your energy to this. Those outsale comps, compare the options. What are your goals as an investor? Like, do you want to hold on to this? Because how much money you're going to spend to fix something and you're going to hold on to it and rent it can be very different to, hey, I'm doing a giant cosmetic reno on this and then we're looking to sell it. Or if you change the residential type, if you're making it a condo conversion, or if you just want to, I don't say you want to like add a roof deck or something. There's like small, medium, and large, and you need to look at that and go, what are the timeframes for all of these projects? What are the costs of these projects? And what are the ARVs for these projects? Which one's actually going to be the one that's worthwhile? So since you gather all that information, that's what you have to decide. And some of that is very personal, right? Like sometimes I love the market and I'm like, I'm down for a condo conversion. I am down to throw this amount of money at something. I got 2 to 3 years. I'm cool with that. Other times I'm like, you can have it for 6 months. That's it. Because things are because that's what my risk threshold is. And I could look at the same deal and want one scenario and not want another. Like how do you look at that? Like with ARV? Because I think it's kind of a relative thing, and it may also have to do with timing, but what do you look at?
I'm glad that you brought up risk aversion and your appetite for risk relative to, number one, what you can afford time-wise and financially, and what the market is doing, and relative to what things are going on around that property, not just what the overall housing market is doing, but what the neighborhood market is doing, what the city market is doing. We need to take multiple views when looking at exit strategies and ARVs and timelines. Time is always relevant when talking about investment properties, because unless you have a turnkey rental and a tenant lined up already, you will not just be spending resources, but you will most likely be spending time as well. And it's so important to take that into account. Just to shed some light on market relativity, I've seen a lot more people discuss focusing on buy and holds or cash out refis because of what the retail home selling market is doing right now. Yep. 6 months ago, everything was flying off the shelf for probably over what they were asking for it, and it was contingency free and sight unseen and all that stuff. So the risk was mitigated because of what the market was doing. Whereas now, I think it's more relevant than it has been recently to look at plan B and C. Okay, so a flip would be great to be able to sell this property and have my return be a lump sum of cash is great. And I need to run myself through the play of, what if this thing doesn't sell immediately? The reason that is so relevant in the beginning, because that can affect what type of rehab you do. If I know I eventually may rent this thing out, I probably don't want to go all out on high-end finishes. Depending on the neighborhood you're in, this might end up being a rental product if that's something you can afford. So I'm
durable and attractive enough.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Durable.
That's the goal.
Put that quote up on the wall.
It's your next tattoo.
I'll put it on the list. So,
but you can never underestimate carrying costs.
Big time.
I think that is the Achilles heel of those that have not invested in real estate and done a construction project of any kind of stature. Really, you could underestimate carrying costs. Like if you do a kitchen renovation, how many people go, oh, my kitchen took 3 weeks longer than I thought it was going to take? Like that kind of, it doesn't have to be a whole house. Right. It could be a bathroom. It could be a kitchen. Carrying costs. I don't know how you do it. And this is kind of like a little extra bonus tip, if you will. Yeah. I like to do all of my pro formas at double the length of time that I think it will take to do. And if I still like the numbers, it makes me feel even better about doing it, because you don't know. people who bought things in January, February, March of 2020, a lot of those, or even I saw people who bought projects to do condo conversions in 2018 and 2019 in DC specifically. And as they were going through the permit process, which takes almost a year to get approved to do the conversion, you were paying to own that property for a year. You have not done anything to it. You've not built anything. You likely don't have your demo permit yet. You don't want a demo because you'll get vermin or whatever. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. You have to think, if I needed to hold on to this for 4 years, even though I want to do it for 2, am I okay with that scenario?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, don't do it.
It's so important not to over leverage yourself, even if it's, especially if you're using hard money, but
Yeah.
anticipate the unexpected in every way that you can. I love that you add time to your pro forma. Add money as well. Add a percentage for unexpected costs or miscellaneous costs, and be aggressive with that number. Expect it. Expect it to be more time and resources and money than your hard money lender might anticipate, than your agent might anticipate. Because in the end, one person is on the hook, or a small group of people in LLC are the ones on the hook for that deal to perform. So would you rather be careful and play worst case scenario with yourself, or see blue skies and rainbows and run as fast as you can towards that project?
Yeah. And not to say that you shouldn't have a certain level of understanding that there is a risk involved in anything.
Naturally.
Honestly, I feel more nervous about putting my money in the stock market right now than I would about buying a house that needs to be flipped. But that is me. That's because I don't follow stocks and I don't feel comfortable in that space. While as real estate is something that I study every day, all day long. So think about, to determine the best ROI, one, it's got to be relative to you and your goals, and follow the process of understanding all of the components, right? Again, like, just to kind of summarize it, look at what you have, really figure out what you have, walk the property, check the tax records, see if there are any liens. If you can look up title too, that's cool if you're connected with the title company in that way. And if not, like, don't worry, that'll happen later. That's a way for you to get out of a contract too if they can't clear title. But hey, it doesn't hurt if there are any surveys or plats. Ask for them. If there are none, sometimes they're online. Remine, I've been able to find plats on Remine when people didn't have paper copies. So that's a way to do it. Free to agents. And I think it's like a paid subscription if you're not an agent, but an online tool you can use. And then once you know what you have, then look at the ARV comps or your out sale comps. Figure out then what's best for you, and especially compared to your financial situation now. So I think this was really great. Is there anything else you want to add to the conversation? Anything that we missed?
I do, actually, and I agree. I'm really enjoying these conversations with you, and just hopefully hopefully giving some people insight from different perspectives of two people who are in the game every day, all day. I just want to touch on quickly potential exit strategies and components of those exit strategies, and I'll keep it short and sweet. Sure. With a fix and flips are very straightforward. You have a product, you have as is comps, you have ARV comps, and then your interpretation of how much time and money it will cost to get what my subject is to any of those comps, hopefully the majority of them, because that's more indicative of what your property can actually do. Some people shoot for outliers and say, I'm going to put as little into my property as possible, or I'm going to spend as much money on this thing as I can and set the new comp. That's up to each person's, that's up to what each person can afford to do time and money wise. So flips, fairly straightforward. As far as analyzing rentals goes, there are a bunch of different rules and ways to do that. Some people look for the 1% rule, where if the money that the property will generate makes up 1% of the property's purchase price, then it's a home run. It's long story short, with rentals, you always want to clearly understand what your monthly expenses are going to be versus what the monthly income is going to be from that property rented out, and how much time you can actually expect for that property to be rented out or not. So
Yep.
expenses versus income on rentals. The third one, and all of these have subcategories for the record. With flips, there are third story additions.
Like we probably could turn this into a never ending series, really.
And I'd be happy to, just because it's with you.
Yay.
But flips and rentals, and then the third most commonly used strategy these days is BRRRR, or a cash out refinance. It is purchasing a property, fixing it up, putting a tenant in it, letting the property season or letting the property build value by it being a performing asset, and then cash out refinancing with what the current property value is based on comps and income versus what it was when you bought it. All of them have
doing it again.
Yeah, exactly. And repeat. Exactly. The last R in the BRRRR acronym is repeat. So relevant information in all of these is understanding your subject property, understanding the potential it has, understanding what things could go wrong, but being prepared for those possibilities, and
being prepared for things you don't understand could go wrong. That's actually probably the biggest money you should put aside.
Every property.
The WTF? Like, what was this?
It's an opportunity to learn. Every single deal analyzed. So we have subject property information, potential, and potential for things to go wrong, but potential exit strategies and the data that is provided for ARV comps, rental comps. That's really your best chance of understanding that's what this property is going to do, is taking the average of closed and rental comps, really.
Yep.
So just wanted to touch on those potential strategies as the three that I've seen most employed. And I think
I see that. I mean, I've recommended many of them before, and especially the 1%. So to give everybody like a quick math example on that. So say you bought something for $300,000, that means every month you should be making $3,000 in rent. So it should be it's a very quick back of the napkin calculation of, does this make sense for me to purchase? Now there's a couple of caveats on there. Like if you're like, say you're on Long Island and the taxes, your property taxes are ridiculous. Like you need to really calculate that a little bit more. Like you need to look at, instead of the 1%, really just look at your full expenses. What are my expenses going to be? How much do I have to put down to get it to a place where I have at least a 20% or 15% monthly profit on my rental? Like the income I'm making is making me at least 20 or 15 to 20% more than what it costs for me to own it. That will start compounding as appreciation and things happen over time. But that's another way to look at it. But it's absolutely imperative that, like, and maybe in future episodes we can break it down a little bit better on how to do these specific calculations on, like, if I'm calculating for just a fix and flips versus major renovations, which they can be the same thing, it depends. One other tip I wanted to mention into that is when you're comparing apples to apples and you're looking at ARV, write down the features that stand out to you. What did they do that made that look really, really cool? Does it look like they splurged on tile in the bathroom? Like, do you think they spent a little bit more? Did they put a glass shower door? Can't tell you how many buyers tell me, oh, well, they didn't put a shower door. Like certain little things. Like investors who don't put in washer dryers, you're making mistakes, guys. You're making mistakes. This is my personal opinion, and it probably is not going to be a fan favorite. But especially moving into a market where we're getting to where buyers are finally getting a little bit drunk with power, right? Because they haven't had any leverage in the last couple of years. And now they're like, I'm getting a home inspection. Like they're really psyched about this. It is important to make sure you are on your game and your stuff looks tight. Like you've got things like the washer dryer. Spend the $1,500 to $1,800. Just do it. It'll look better. It'll sell faster. People don't want to deal with it. Like their interest rate has almost doubled. They don't want to buy a washer or a dryer. Just make it pristine. So if there's certain features that another property has, say they added like a really small outdoor kitchen, or there's a soaker tub in the bathroom, or there's a wine fridge in the kitchen, take note of those things, right? Like adding a wine fridge appliance is only a few $100s to your total budget, but there's a perceived value of what you did renovation wise that elevates the whole thing. And it sticks in buyers' heads. Little features like that will actually make you a lot more money, and you probably won't spend all that much. Like, you're already putting in countertops.
Yeah.
Cabinets, like, just stick a wine fridge in there.
Couldn't agree more. You're looking for common denominators and outliers on the good side and the bad side. If you have 3 comps or 5 comps that are all within 10K value of each other, and one of them on the lower side, only has 1.5 bathrooms and all the other ones have 2 or more, take note of that. Outliers and common denominators are what we want when we're filtering data as far as comps go. So yeah, it works both ways.
Anything that changes functionality.
Yeah,
so
functionality.
Parking, appliances, ease of use of the house, right? Ring doorbells, Nest thermostats, Nest smoke detectors, lighting that works with like devices. Things like that really matter. Like, they actually matter to the polish of things. Board and batten walls. Like, they don't actually cost all that much. And if you're fixing walls and painting stuff, the investment, the polish that it gives it, you want to make sure you're budgeting for that. Because if your comp has a board and batten wall going up the stairs, an iron stair railing on like historically preserved stairs, and a really cute looking vegetable garden in the back. This might sound familiar to you, Chase. And a really cute vegetable garden that presents for like probably not much more than like say $1,000 in all the materials I just said, and you're already paying for labor. It's all the same. That will make a difference. And if that is what your comp has, you better make sure that's in your house, because otherwise you undersold compared to the comp, and you can't expect the same amount of money. You don't have the same leverage you did 3 months ago, 4 months ago. So be wary of that. Really make sure you're matching your comps on your project. But I know we've kind of like gone off the deep end on this, and we have a lot of other topics that we can also hit in the future. But anything else you want to finish off with?
Just the desire to do a bit more of a whiteboard discussion on a similar topic. I think it would be really helpful to show people exactly how we analyze, or different ways to analyze the potential of a good cash flowing rental flip. It might be nice to show people the nuts and bolts of it all.
I would love to do that. So actually, you know what? Why don't we come up with a time, and we'll post here in the Grid Network, and we'll do a live Zoom meeting, and anybody who wants to join can participate. And I'll come over to the new Western office, and we'll go live, and we can share and collaborate on deals and analyzing deals together, if you guys are down for that.
Great idea. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys. And thank you, Chase. I'm really glad that we got to talk about this. And as we said, remember, I was like, oh, this will be a quick topic. Like, every time I say that, it's like 45 minutes later. But this was great. I'm really glad that we talked about it. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the chat, and Chase and I will make sure to get back to you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Grid.
Thank you. All right. Have a good week, everybody.